I discovered a terrifying secret in the old security tapes. What they didn't want us to hear, I never should have opened that door. I was just doing my usual routine, rummaging through the dusty basement of my new house. The flickering light bulb cast eerie shadows on the walls. The smell of mold hung in the cold air, making my skin crawl. That's when I found it. A box of old security tapes, gathering dust like forgotten memories. My heart raced with both curiosity and dread that I could almost hear whispers coming from them. There was something strange about them. Why were they hidden? Why did the previous owner leave them behind? I felt a chill run down my spine as I popped one into the ancient VCR. The screen flickered to life, and my stomach dropped. On screen, dark figures loomed in the corners of dimly lit rooms. The grainy footage was silent, but I could sense the tension. Were they watching? I leaned in closer, my breath shallow. The dimness of the basement swallowed me, and shadows danced around me. I could barely see my own hands. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from behind me. I jumped, my heart pounding like a drum. I turned, half expecting to see someone there, but nothing. Just silence. My chest tightened. I tried to focus on the screen again. The figures were moving, darting in and out of the frame, bodies twisting in unnatural ways. I shivered. This couldn't be real. A chill whipped around me, and the hairs on my arms stood on end. The tape just kept playing, the shadows swirling more violently now. I felt like I was losing grip on reality. Objects around me shifted. Was it just my imagination? I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking in the darkness, just out of view. As the footage spiraled into chaos, the final scene flashed an obscured face for a split second. I felt a scream clawing at my throat. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. The lights flickered, dimmed, and then, everything went black. In that chasm of darkness, I heard another noisy soft shuffle behind me. My heart dropped, I was being watched. My breath quickened, panic curling tightly in my chest, as I slowly turned around, expecting the worst. The door slammed shut. Hey, before we continue with this amazing story, I need to give you an important heads up. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube unsubscribed them without warning. Take a quick second to check the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I'd hate for you to miss any of the exclusive content coming soon. And while you're there, smash that like button, it really helps me out with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who's part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's connect. Clutching the remote tightly, I fumbled to find a light switch, but only darkness answered. A chill swept through the basement like the breath of a ghost. Adrenaline rushed in waves, and I felt my vision narrowing, my chest tightening with every passing second. The sensation of eyes boring into me became unbearable. Some unseen force was pressing against the skin of my back. I turned, half expecting to face whatever trapped me here, but my body found no courage to move too far from the VCR. The haunting whir of the tape still spinning echoed in the gloom, filling the silence with a sense of dread. I longed to rip the tape out, to silence the images that haunted me, but I was transfixed, as if I were the prey and the screen was its hunter. Sensing a shift in the air, I strained to listen. Soft murmurs rose in the darkness. They sounded like hesitant whispers, slithering through the heavy air. I caught fragments, nothing concrete, only the feral cadence of something primal, something sinister. And then, a word surprised me, weaving through the noise. You. My pulse quickened. Who was declaring my presence in a place where no one else should be? I pulled my gaze from the screen, willing sanity back to my mind, but the basement around me had transformed into something more malicious. Shadows crept along the walls, whispering like a Carusa jeering, desperate symphony urging me to flee, yet I remained anchored in my spot. Suddenly, the whispers turned horrific. They swelled, becoming a cacophony of disjointed screams and cries for help, a chorus of torment that clawed at my ears. My trembling fingers unlatched the VCR, and I yanked the tape free. The room plunged into silence, but the echoes of the possessed voices remained reverberating in my skull. Just as I sank into the stillness, a figure emerged from the dark abyss to my left, a hushed silhouette that twisted and contorted as though molded by the shadows themselves. I couldn't discern its features, but those eyes, two pinpricks of glimmering malice x-rayed through the dimness. I stumbled back into a wall, cold wood scraping against my skin, and let out a whimper, choking on the dread that gripped my throat. "Help me," it rasped, voice slithering low with a chilling sensuality that sent shudders down my spine. "You have to listen to me, they won't let you go." My stomach churned at its implication. Everything I had witnessed on the tape screamed back to meth figures dancing on the screen, their warped limbs curling in agony. I could almost see their whispers now, like a living dark mass encroaching on my sense of reality. It was a warning. The figure stretched its arm, crooked and skeletal, beckoning me closer. A rush of fear and curiosity collided inside me, rooting me on the spot. "You don't understand, they will come for you," it stammered, its voice dwindling as the shadows shifted uneasily around us. "You have to know," it pressed, desperately clawing through layers of thick darkness to reach me. The basement trembled violently, the walls creaked, wailing like tortured souls, and I could feel a presence growing bolder, angrier. I stepped back, fumbling in my pockets for my phone, for light, for anything to chase the darkness away. With trembling hands, I flipped it open. But as I did, the figure screeched a primal, fearful wail that echoed, reverberating against the dimness and emerging from the very depths of my own being. Then the lights flickered back on, harsh and invasive. I blinked, eyes adjusting, scanning for the figure I thought I had seen, but it was gone. The basement lay empty, just me and the lingering remnants of terror. My breath quickened, and I swung around, heart pounding wildly, desperate to escape. As I finally made my way toward the stairs, the sound of wooden creaks behind me drew my attention. I turned slowly, my breath exaggerated as shadows coalesced again. But this time, there were more faces could be discerned, twisted in anguish, all of them reaching for me. I sprinted up the staircase, desperate, frantic, when a chilling voice echoed in my mind, "You can't leave, their hunger is insatiable." Just as I reached the top of the stairs, I felt fingers graze my ankle. I stumbled and fell, my scream piercing the air as darkness loomed over me once more. The moment I hit the ground, a cold blanket of dread settled over me. The fingers that had grasped my ankle were no mere figments of my imagination. They felt real, sticky and clammy, latching onto my skin as if they were siphoning my strength. I kicked my foot, trying to shake off the dead weight, but they tightened their hold, refusing to relent. Panicking, I rolled onto my back, heart slamming against my ribs, and stared into the oppressive darkness that swallowed the rest of the basement. The lights flickered again, and I caught flashes of ghastly faces, straining and morphing grotesquely. Their mouths moved to form silent screams, desperation etched into every twisted feature. They seemed to simmer in a state of undying torment, a promise of horrors yet to come. In an instant, the basement darkened further, the lights flickering out like extinguished candles, plunging me into a void where the only sound was my own ragged breathing mixing with the stifled cries. I grappled for the stairs, palms pressed against the cold wood, but the fingers tangled around my ankle reasserted themselves with an unnatural strength. They began to pull me backward, toward the suffocating darkness beneath. No. "Please," I pleaded, kicking wildly as I scrambled on the floor, coaxing my legs to free themselves from the suffocating grip. Tears blurred my vision, and panic stoked a wildfire in my chest. My fingernails dug into the grain of the wood as though the surface itself might rescue me from this nightmare, but it was useless. I was being drawn deeper into their lurking maw. Suddenly, a blinding light crashed down around me. My phone had slipped from my grasp, illuminating the surroundings, the glow a sanctuary against the encroaching dread. The shadows lifted long enough for me to catch sight of what lurked in the depths, a writhing mass of bodies, each lost in their torturous existence, faces contorted in everlasting grief and pleading gaze. No. I screamed, the sound reverberating off the walls, echoing back in mockery. As I tried to crawl forward, desperate for freedom, shouts echoed through the basement. Not from the haunting figures, but from somewhere, deeper. Join us. Join us forever. With one last surge of adrenaline, I flung myself forward, feeling the grip at my ankle loosen just enough for me to scramble up the staircase. My body surged past the last steps, bursting into the kitchen, lungs burning as I gasped for air. I slammed the door shut, locking it behind me, leaning against it as my heart thudded a frantic rhythm. The soothing sound of my breathing filled the space, until a low thump pierced the silence, followed by a scraping sound against the wooden floor. I froze, a new kind of fear washing over me as I surveyed the shadowed hall fading into darkness. The quiet was unnatural, the kind that made my skin crawl. I dared to peer through the narrow gap of the door, but the hallway lay still and deserted. I realized in horror that the noise had come from within the house. A sickening realization dripped like ice down my spine. Whatever haunted the basement was not restricted to those dark walls. It had followed me. Then, a whisper, so close it seemed to breathe down my neck, curled into my ear like a serpent. "You've let them in." Chills cascaded through me, and I spun around just in time to see my phone flicker wildly on the countertop. I reached for it, but before I could grasp it, the screen flashed bright and froze. An image burned into view, a still frame of the basement and every anguished face that had reached for me, frozen in a grotesque tableau. My fingers trembled on the edge of my phone screen as the message blinked ominously, "You can't escape." Then the lights went out, plunging the room into suffocating darkness yet again. Panic surged anew as I felt something pulse through the air, a shifting presence swirling around me, vibrating with malicious intent. The shadows began to coalesce, pulling tighter, inching toward me hungrily. This time, there was no safe retreat. I was trapped within my own home, a new prison, a vessel for their revenge. With one last resounding thump, something heavy crashed against the door, rattling it violently. I stood paralyzed, heart near bursting, the darkness closing in as I braced for the inevitable. "They're here," I whispered to myself, a chill settling in my bones. At that moment, the door splintered, a jagged crack forming, and I realized I was about to discover just how far their reach extended, and my scream was swallowed whole by the encroaching shadows. The door cracked open, a gaping maw that revealed only the thick curls of darkness beyond. I stumbled back, and the phony me only source of light slipped from my trembling fingers, clattering to the floor and extinguishing itself in a final flicker. Everything went black, absolute and suffocating, and I felt the pulse of something sinister gathering around me. "What do you want?" I called out, my voice quaking as it bounced off the walls, returning to me like a somber echo of desperation. Silence answered, but it wasn't a comforting stillness. It felt alive, as if the darkness was breathing, shifting, preparing to strike. Then came the whisper again, weaving through the gloom like a predatory creature. "You opened the door, for us." My pulse quickened, and I turned, instinctively searching for a weapon, any sort of protection. The kitchen drawers creaked open as if a ghostly hand toyed with them, and I snatched a steak knife just as another violent shudder rattled the door. I brandished it, trembling but resolved to fight against whatever lurked beyond. The sound erupted again, a sickening pop and crack, as if bones were breaking. The door shuddered against the force, and within that dark void, shadows began to stretch forward, tendrils unfurling like hungry claws reaching for flesh. My breath caught as my survival instinct kicked in. I had to escape, but which way? Just as I contemplated my escape route, a horrifying sound pierced the quiet, the high-pitched wails of those lost souls from the basement, now echoing through my home, threaded with the dissonance of muffled laughter. I stumbled backward, barely keeping my footing as the darkness throbbed around me, a living entity clawing for my essence. That I in a mad dash towards the back door, I felt something brush against my leg, a cool, clammy caress that sent a jolt of panic coursing through me. I glanced down to see twisted, shadowy fingers unfurling, melding from the darkness as they reached for me. I kicked out violently, sending the thing reeling momentarily. "Get away from me!" I screamed as I threw my weight against the back door, desperately fumbling for the knob. As I turned it with frantic urgency, the dial slipped from my fingertips, the door only rattling in response. I felt the shadows close in, swirling around my ankles like mist, teasing at the hem of reality. "There's no other way," the whisper came again, chilling and seductive. Join us, that I could no longer ignore the pulling tug of the whispering shadows. I had felt their grief before, their longing to connect, to find solace in shared suffering. But I wasn't ready to embrace their wretched existence, not just yet. With renewed determination, I yanked the door open with a savage force, the wood splintering as I burst into the night, gasping for the fresh air that now tasted of freedom, but the yard lay still, moonlit and serene, a stark contrast to the chaos in the house. My feet struck the ground, but the sounds followed me into the night, echoing cries that merged with the rustling leaves, laughter that tickled at the edges of my mind, intertwining with the malevolent whispers. Glimpses of movement flashed in the corner of my vision. The trees seemed to twist and warp, and shadows darted between the trunks just out of reach, taunting me. I sprinted towards the driveway, reasoning that even in hell, I had to put distance between myself and that malevolence I had invited. As I neared the street, a figure stepped into view, cloaked in darkness. I skidded to a halt, feeling my heart stutter painfully in my chest. It was a child, small, delicate, with hollow eyes that retained the weight of unspeakable suffering. "Help us," the voice came, soft yet commanding, resonating with the ache of countless lost souls. The sight struck me frozen, obliterating the fear of the darkness creeping behind me. I felt the ground tremble beneath my feet, the whispers crescendoing into a wail as I lost sight of the child and felt a new presence surge not just from the house, but from every shadow surrounding me. "Join us." They screamed, their mournful cadence wrapping around me like chains, pulling and pulling. I staggered back, confusion setting in. They weren't just seeking a refuge, they were hungry for something more. Everything around me pulsed, and I realized with horror I wasn't just being haunted by the house's inhabitants, I was being lured into something far worse, something that transcended time and space. As the whispers intensified, drowning out my thoughts, the ground trembled violently. My sanity wavered, and the shadows began to swirl violently, a tempest of lost souls and their merciless abyss. In a moment of clarity, I turned to run, but their grip was already tightening around me, the darkness folding in like an embrace from a long-lost friend. Before I could escape, the child reappeared, eyes wide and glowing with a terror mirrored in my own. The silence shattered by a blood-curdling scream that erupted from behind. "Help!" The scream morphed into a cacophony of voices, a unified chorus of those haunting me, crashing against my ears, with each syllable serving as a resonating heartbeat, and suddenly, I understood. "Help us!" I screamed back, desperate for deliverance, but I was met only with the shadows' chilling laughter as they danced closer, wrapping tighter. The earth beneath me cracked, the ground opening like a chasm eager to swallow me whole. And then I fell, swirling into darkness, the high-pitched laughter echoing in my ears, and a voice that pierced through the cacophony. "You cannot escape, you are one of us now." I hit the ground with a bone-jarring thud, the air rushing from my lungs as I tumbled into the depths of oblivion. The darkness enveloped me, a swallowing mass that pressed against my skin, seeping into my mind. The screams of desperate souls were muffled now, barely audible under a layer of oppressive silence that lay thick, almost viscous, in this inky void. I scrambled up, instinctively pushing against the unseen walls that confined me. Panic ignited again, but something deeper, more sinister beckoned from the blackness. There were voices, whispers swirling around me, seductive and intimate, that scraped the surface of my consciousness. "You have come home," one of them cooed gently, echoing my own thoughts but tainted with a twisted longing. "No. Two don't belong to you," I shouted, my voice cracking as I clawed at the dark that pressed down like a weight on my shoulders, trying to pull me into its depths. "Join us," they purred once more, delight crackling through the air like static electricity. The weight of countless gazes bore down upon me. It felt as if 1,000 unseen eyes were drinking in my despair. Images flitted through my mind like shadows of memories, faces I recognized but couldn't place, moments shared long ago, laughter that echoed in hallways of a home long abandoned. It was intoxicating and deadly in its familiarity that I stumbled deeper into the shadows, searching for an escape, but each step only led me closer to the voices, wrapping tighter around my resolve. I could feel their longing, their desire to pull me into their embrace, to grant me a sinister sense of belonging among the haunted. "Let go of her," a new voice sliced through the haze, sharper than glass. It felt like a thread weaving a path through the darkness. For a fleeting moment, I felt a surge of hope, a tether pulling me upwards. Who are you? I gasped, straining against the unseen grip that tightened around my throat, choking my resolve. I am the barrier, the voice replied, resonating with a haunting clarity. I keep them at bay, but I can't hold forever. With that, the void trembled violently, as if it were alive, and I felt the tendrils of darkness shift in response to the intruder. It was an all-consuming force that quaked beneath my feet, vibrating through the very marrow of my bones. Run. The voice commanded, but there was nowhere to run. The ground split open with a roar that sent shockwaves through the darkness. I felt myself being pulled viciously toward the gaping maw of chaos. Shadows latched onto my limbs like ravenous animals. Panic surged as their laughter erupted in a cacophony of derision, drowning out the only light that had penetrated this shroud. I fought against the unseen bonds, but the shadows coiled tighter, pulling me back toward the maw of the void. You cannot escape, sweet child, they taunted, their whispers cascading around me. You are part of us now, our strength drains away your will. Suddenly everything halted, as if the universe had drawn breath. I was suspended in a moment of stillness, heart racing, uncertain of what lay beyond the darkness. The pulse of the chasm shifted violently beneath my feet, ready to swallow me whole. Then a blinding light ruptured through the shadows, striking me with its intensity. It illuminated the faces of those who were lost, their gaunt features twisted in a mask of agony, pleading for freedom. They were no longer just phantoms but reflections of my own despair, swirling together a vortex that drew me closer and closer. Help us. They screamed in unison, desperation clawing at their voices. The ground split wider, revealing a swirling abyss yawning below, a call to the long-suffering, summoning me to descend deeper. Just as the darkness threatened to swallow me whole, I heard the voice once more, desperate yet determined. Remember who you are, you have strength beyond your pain. With a sudden burst of clarity, I braced myself and tore free from the shadow's grip, propelled not by will alone but by sheer terror of what lay beneath. I leaped for the light while the cries of the spirits surged into a cacophony, their anguish ripping at my resolve. But as I broke through the threshold of darkness, the ground beneath me vanished, and I plummeted into nothingness, feeling the gnashing teeth of despair grazing my skin. No. I screamed, grasping for any handhold in the void, but silence swallowed my sound. And then, just when I thought all was lost, I heard a faint echo of what had come before, a voice whispering desperately into the abyss, "You're not alone. Find the truth." In that nanosecond of clarity, the world above exploded into sight, and for a single breath, I saw the remains of my home spiraling into the void, the living room, the door, the creeping shadows, and then a figure standing at the threshold clad in white, eyes shining with a malevolence I recognized but couldn't comprehend. "Welcome back," the figure smiled, and in that instant, I understood. I was never alone. Before I could process the shock, darkness encased me, plunging me back into that familiar terror, a laugh echoing as I felt the last vestiges of my strength slip away. "You've always belonged to us, now you will give us what we desire." The walls of reality twisted and folded as I was yanked back into the suffocating darkness, each breath becoming a battle as I clawed at the unseen chains that held me. I could still feel the sinister grin of the figure watching me through the void, a malevolent force that reveled in my despair. Memories surged through me, crashing like relentless waves against the cliffs of my sanity. Snapshots of laughter and light now shrouded in shadows, the sense of home turned acrid and foreign. Escape is futile, the voices chimed, now a symphony of despair, singing through the crevices of my mind. I felt their presence weaving around me, brushing against my limbs, weaving like threads in a tapestry of fear. The soft warmth of something that felt like tenderness shifted around me, but I knew better. It was a trap, a deception spun from shadow. I forced myself to remember the voice that urged me to resist, a flicker of hope buried under layers of terror. I must fight, I whispered to myself, feeling the phantom's pulse against my heart demanding utter submission. But the deeper I delved into my memories, the more the whispers intensified, their insistence swelling into a crescendo of anguish. Suddenly, I was yanked forward, the darkness receded momentarily, revealing fragmented images swirling around me like the detritus of dreams forgotten. I saw flashes of those who had come before, met cries resonating long after their bodies had been cast aside. Each face contorted in agony bore familiar features, a brother, a sister, even my childhood friend who had vanished years ago, swallowed by the same darkness that sought me now. Help us, Lila, their voices intermingled, each plea a dagger driven into my soul. We can escape together. My name echoed in the void, ricocheting off the walls like a haunting refrain. I clamped my hands over my ears, trying to drown out the cacophony, but the sound pierced through, unfurling memories I had buried deep. I remembered our smiles, our secrets, the warmth of our bond, and the day they disappeared, one by one, swallowed by the very shadows that now beckoned me. Join us, they crooned softly, coaxing me towards another expanse of darkness that opened wide, filled with echoes of longing. A part of me yearned to lean into them, to surrender and be part of the mysterious collective. But another part screamed to resist, to break free. My heart thundered in my chest as I stumbled forward, the ground trembling beneath my weight. I could feel my pulse rise, every heartbeat brought a new tremor, a sign of power awakening inside me, urging me to stand my ground. You will not take me. I challenged the shadows, steeling my resolve as they surged around me, a monstrous wave intent on dragging me down. Can you not see? The voices twisted in their pathos. You are one of us already. The truth lies beneath. The ground parted again, unveiling another void, darker and more chaotic than before. I fought against it, desperate to keep my footing. Just then, a flash of the world I had briefly escaped illuminated before me, a glimpse of my home, suspended in an eternal twilight. I saw the reflection of the figure in white, now shadowed and shifting like smoke, standing at the door I once knew. In that moment, an awful realization gripped me. The door was only ever a fleeting illusion, a mirage that led me deeper into this twisted realm. Come back to us, Lila, a familiar voice pleaded from the depths. It was my brother's voice, laced with tenderness and desperation, only now it felt coated in sweet poison. How could he still linger in this place? The thought made my skin crawl, images of our past colliding with the reality of our current nightmare. No. I roared, pushing against the ground, feeling its pressure climb higher, erupting with a strength that was both mine and not mine. I choose to fight. With that declaration, I felt a surge within me, a burst of defiance that split through the darkness. The voices shrieked in unison, the tangible dread wrapping around me like barbed wire, but I could feel the energy alter, shifts happening in the shadows as my will rippled outwards, pushing against the suffocating walls that closed in. Yet, just as a sense of victory began to swell, the ground cracked open again, not with the yawning maw of despair but revealing something beneath, something ancient. A pair of glowing red eyes pierced through the fissures, illuminating the suffocating shadows with a malevolence that clawed at my very core. I froze, the familiarity washing over me like acid, an unspeakable terror that sent my heart racing, an echo from the depths of a childhood nightmare I had long buried. No, it can't be. I quivered, realizing it was not just the darkness that threatened to consume me, but something far worse lurking in the depths, waiting to claim its next victim. As those eyes bored into mine, I felt the darkness behind me surge violently, an insatiable hunger awakened. The voices erupted into manic laughter, cascading around me, drowning the world in a frenzy too terrifying to describe. Embrace your true heritage, the figures whispered, laughter tinged with malice, and let the shadows claim you. And at that moment, before I could even scream, the ground beneath me began to collapse, launching me into a freefall of horror, plummeting into a void that waited with open arms. I could feel something vast and terrible rising in the deep, its breath a chilling promise of inevitability, and as it approached, I thought I glimpsed the outline of a familiar face wreathed in shadows, and then, it became clear, I had not been fighting for my freedom, but rather spiraling closer to the truth I had long avoided, the truth that they weren't merely lost souls. They were my family, and I was heading straight for a reunion none of us truly wanted. I fell, the darkness swallowing me whole as I plummeted into an abyss that seemed endless, an encounter with the void that stretched far beyond any nightmare I had ever imagined. Each heartbeat resonated in my ears, a frantic drum echoing, the terror clawing at my insides. I gasped, reaching out blindly, desperate for something solid to ground myself. As I descended, a cold wind wrapped itself around me, chilling my bones and distorting the very air I attempted to breathe. Shivers danced down my spine as memories of laughter turned to distant screams, carrying through the void like rotting whispers. I felt the me family hovering on the precipice of madness, their feelings entwined with my own as they beckoned me into a darkness far more frightening than I had ever faced. Suddenly, I landed with a heavy thud, the ground beneath me a patchwork of ancient stones slick with an unseen grime. Dread pulsed in the air, thick and suffocating like a fog that smothered everything it touched. I blinked, trying to regain my bearings, watching as shadows regrouped in the corners of my vision. I stood alone in a cavernous space, its walls slick with moisture, the darkness a living entity that pulsed and twisted. At the far end, I caught flickering lights, a vision of what appeared to be a long hallway lined with doors that whispered secrets too terrible to comprehend. As I approached cautiously, a palpable energy enveloped me, tendrils of dark intent caressing my shoulders, lifting the hair on my neck in a cold salute to the unknown. Each door held its own narrative, terrifying hints of the souls trapped behind them flickered and flared, their unprocessed grief and incandescent rage coiling around me. I reached out towards the first door, emblazoned with faded etchings of familiar faces, those lost in the darkness. When I pressed my palm against the wood, the echo of my brother's laughter resonated within, and the door rattled violently as if protesting my touch. "Step back," a voice croaked, low and grating like nails on stone. I spun around to find a hunched figure emerging from the shadows, a gaunt visage adorned with sunken eyes that gleamed like molten glass. "They don't want your help. They are ours now." "Who are you?" I demanded, despite the knot of terror that tangled in my throat. "My name is Jareth." His voice was a twisted caress, soothing yet grotesque. "I am the gatekeeper of this plane." He gestured expansively, swirling his finger to indicate the infinite doors around us. "You're drawn here, like all your kind, believing you can bring them home. But the truth is far more sinister." That I took a step back, the reality of his words sinking in. "What have you done to them?" I spat, the outrage burning in my chest like acid. "Nothing they didn't want done to themselves," he chortled, the laughter jagged and dissonant. "You are experiencing their desires, their wishes for freedom twisted into something vile. The shadows they pull from every ounce of pain, every longing left unfulfilled. Your brother and the others, they awakened a hunger in this place." My stomach churned at the implications of his confession, and I instinctively lifted my hands, feeling the electric crackle of impending terror arc through my fingers. "No, I won't let you take me. I will fight for them." Jareth's grin widened, revealing teeth too sharp, too unnatural. "Ah, the fight is what enlivens this realm. But you will find, the more you struggle, the deeper you sink into the mire." With that, he flicked his wrist, and the doors surrounding us quaked violently, the muffled cries behind them growing louder, more desperate. I pressed my hands to my ears to block the waves of sorrow crashing over me, but with each thundering scream I felt my control slip away. The sensations assailed me: grief, anger, fear echoing through the halls like a twisted symphony dedicated to the lost. "Embrace it," he taunted, his voice weaving into the crescendo of despair surrounding me. "You are destined to join them. It is in your blood, Lila. Return to the shadows that birthed you, ignoring the waters pulling me deep down his unwanted path." I frantically scanned the walls, my frantic mind racing to process the dreadful truth unfolding around me. Images flickered in the mist: me family, silhouettes running, stumbling into the embrace of chaos, shadows swirling and wrapping tighter. No. I shouted defiantly, shaking uncontrollably. "I will save them." As I focused my energy, I pushed against the gravitational pull, feeling it press against my chest in relentless waves, threatening to drag me into despair. But Jareth sneered, reveling in my struggle, the shadows twitching at his feet like live serpents. A piercing scream reverberated, slicing through the air. My heart lurched when I recognized it, an unmistakable cry that sent chills crawling down my spine. It was a plea for help, raw and unfiltered, tearing at the fabric of my soul. It was my brother's voice. No. I surged forward, adrenaline propelling me against the door etched with their faces, slamming my palm against it as the shadows writhed in hungry anticipation. "Let him go. Let them all go." But instead of yielding, the door splintered open, revealing a blinding light that swallowed the darkness whole. For a breathless moment, I could see something shifting within the silhouettes of my family reaching for me, but their eyes were hollow, luminous pools of nothingness. The air crackled with unspeakable energy, as if all the fabric of this cursed dimension had come undone at my breach. Suddenly, a wailing erupted, drowning out all thoughts, as the figures writhed in torment, their mouths forming silent screams, the darkness howling in rage. "Fool!" Jareth bellowed, "you do not know what you have unleashed." And in that instant, as the light threatened to consume me, I felt gravity shift around me, pulling me into a torrential darkness swirling with faces that were now contorted in anguish. I was no longer in control. It wasn't just an awakening, it was a reckoning. The last thing I saw before the darkness enveloped me was the realization that shadows do not just consume, they adapt, and the echoes of my family's memories were shifting, swirling into a grotesque amalgamation of moments that had never existed. Perhaps the deepest truth lay not in saving them, but in becoming one with the darkness that had always awaited my return. And then, with a final echoing scream, I was plunged into a whirlpool of memories not my own, a labyrinth of horrors where the true cost of darkness was set to unfold. The oppressive darkness tightened around me, like a vice of ice that squeezed every ounce of air from my lungs. The flickering light from the door I had breached flickered, casting grotesque shadows that danced against the wet stone floor. Faces emerged within the darkness, half-formed visages that morphed and twisted in agony, their mouths contorting in silent screams. I had unleashed something far beyond my comprehension, a flood of memories that were not my own but resonated deeply within the marrow of my bones. As I drifted further into this hellish realm, I could feel myself being pulled toward the swirling affectations of the haunted silhouettes. They reached out, hands grasping, desperate for the warmth I could no longer provide. Their faces bore the marks of suffering, a distorting reflection of my own torment. Each silent scream resonated within my mind, intertwining with my own pain, feeding the depth of my dread. Suddenly, the floor beneath me gave way, dropping into a chasm of darkness. I fell again, but this time there was no empty void. There was a soft whisper of moss and the caress of damp earth as I landed, forced down into the damp soil of a forgotten graveyard that concealed secrets better left buried. Tombstones loomed like ancient sentinels, their inscriptions blurred, names washed away by the passing of time. My body trembled as the murmurs of history collided with my senses, each grave carrying the weight of despair from those who had perished too soon. In the distance, I heard the faintest sound of laughter, a maddening yet dulcet melody. It resonated through the graveyard, seemingly pulling at the edges of my sanity. I stumbled forward, drawn to the source, desperation surging through me as the laughter morphed into a cacophony of sinister chuckles. "This way. Come play with us," the voices beckoned. I realized with horror that the darkness wrapped around me was not merely a veil but an invitation. They wanted me to join their festivity of despair. Ignoring the instinctual urge to flee, I plodded forward, my feet sinking into the earth as if it were softening to swallow me whole. The laughter grew louder, underscored by a rhythmic chant, a twisted nursery rhyme meant to lure in the unwary. "Lost little Lila, lost in the light. Join us forever, let go of your fight." The words slithered through the shadows, filling the air with an intoxicating dread that numbed any remnant of rational thought. My heart pounded relentlessly, each beat drumming a warning against the encroaching madness. Behind me, I could feel Jareth's malicious gaze, an unseen puppeteer reveling in my dismay. As the laughter crescendoed, I caught sight of them, figures materializing through the shadows, their bodies adorned in flowing garments that swirled like smoke. Each carried the anguish of their demise on their faces, yet wore expressions of cruel glee, celebrating the imminent addition to their wretched gathering. I could see the hollow eyes of my brother among the revelers, his once bright spark now eclipsed by an insatiable thirst for the darkness that called to him, "Join us, Lila." His voice pierced through the laughter, dripping with sorrow and temptation. "You don't have to struggle. Embrace what we have become." "No!" I screamed, recoiling as I clutched my head, the weight of their anticipation oppressing me, pulling me into a drunken dance of despair. I felt it then, tendrils of shadow grasping at my ankles, seeking to encircle me in their grasp. One step closer, and I wouldn't just witness their madness, I would become it. I dashed to the nearest gravestone, pressing my back against its cold surface, desperate to breathe even as the shadows constricted like creeping ivy. I had to think clearly, I had to remember what I was fighting for. The faces of my family still lingered behind that blasted door, a cursed thread-bound collection of lost souls depending on my resolve. With urgency coursing through me, I snapped my eyes shut, summoning the energy deep within the desperate need to break the ritualistic hold this darkness had over me. Suddenly, a pulse surged through the ground, a violent tremor that jolted the specters, disrupting the twisted revelry. The laughter shifted, morphing into an ominous growl, a primal hunger awakened within the shadows. You think you can resist? You think you can escape? The voices roared with a new intensity, the darkness surging forward with malevolent purpose. No. I screamed defiantly, forcing my eyes open, focusing on the distant flicker of light that still pulsed, shimmering with the promise of salvation. With a burst of willpower, I tore myself from the grave's embrace and sprinted towards the light. But as I leapt forward, the ground trembled violently, and gnarled roots shot forth, ensnaring my legs like wicked serpents. Lila. I heard them call once more, the chorus of tormented faces melding into an unholy chant, wrapping around my heart with icy fingers. The truth dawned upon me, an unbearable weight. I was not just running toward the light. I was escaping from something even darker than despair. I was fleeing from myself. The shadows shrieked as I fought against the grasp of the roots, pulling them apart with all the strength I could muster. No. I won't let you take me. With a final cry, I broke free, bursting into the bright light that marked the threshold of madness and clarity. But as the light enveloped me, an echoing voice reverberated through the air. You can't escape your inheritance, Lila. We are everywhere you go, bound by blood. Waiting. Then, with a violent snap, I was thrown back into the depths of darkness. And as the earth closed around me, darkness found me once more, a reminder that the only way out was to descend deeper into the horror I had tried to escape. And somewhere, echoing through the void, a chilling truth settled into my gut like a stone. It was never about saving them, it was about surviving this terrible legacy. The laughter returned, louder and more jubilant than before, and in that moment of dread I understood the shadows were already preparing for my inevitable return. I felt the ground beneath my back shift and tumble, throwing me into a spiraling whirlwind of shadows and despair. The cacophony of laughter had subsided into a low, rumbling growl, an ominous tide rolling in, searching for the remnants of my strength. I landed again in a realm of thick fog and suffocating darkness. Panic clawed at my throat as I struggled to rise, to shake the shadows from my limbs. My breathing quickened, the air here was stale, suffused with an unsettling chill that crept beneath my skin. Distant whispers slithered through the fog, weaving together like gnarled roots that twisted around my consciousness. We see you, Lila. Always. The words echoed against unseen walls, reverberating like the drumbeat of a funeral march, relentless and inescapable. With renewed urgency, I stumbled to my feet, my heart racing against the solitude that surrounded me. The more I moved, the more the shadows pressed in, eager for my demise. I could feel the chill creeping further through me, feeding on my fear. I had to find a way out. Ahead, I noticed a flicker of whitey, a pale light cutting through the pervasive fog, tauntingly inviting yet filled with foreboding. I wasn't convinced it was the salvation I sought. It felt like a lure, but in this dreadful abyss, anything felt preferable to the haunting grasp of the shadows behind me. I took a cautious step toward it, the ground oddly soft, almost sponge-like underfoot. As I approached, grotesque faces started materializing in the mist, emerging from the dim ether. Their features were etched with anguish, their hollow eyes dug deep into my own, pleading, seeking an answer to a question I couldn't comprehend. They whispered my name, a haunting chorus melding with the dissonance of the shadows. Join us, Lila! A scream built in my chest, threatening to erupt, but instead of sound, it was annihilated by the tightening clutches of anxiety. They had none of Jareth's familiar cadence, nor had they been shaped by the lives of the living. These were specters of despair, lost souls scattered throughout the chasms of forgotten memories. Let us show you the truth, one of them crooned, the voice seductive yet shattered with hopelessness. What lies beneath is more glorious than the light you chase. Another face beside it twisted in delight, its lips curling into a horrible smile. Show her. Show her what it means to belong. The ground trembled again, and as I teetered precariously, patches of earth began to rise, forming supernatural silhouettes around me. It was as if the very soil craved my terror, pulling on my heartstrings with darkened intentions. I realized I was not merely listening, I was part of an ancient Karusa soul meant to guide others into eternal shadow. With a rush of adrenaline, I broke their spell, threading my way through the grasping figures, and lunged toward the flickering light. Now it felt alive, an incessant pulse that thrummed with the weight of countless secrets. As if sensing my resolve, the light began to stretch, expanding and revealing a long-abandoned chapel, its crumbling stone adorned with vines like the fingers of long-dead lovers entwined in an eternal embrace. But as I crossed the threshold, something unexpected happened. The moment I stepped beyond the entrance, the shadows swelled, enveloping the blue-tinted hue of the chapel in darkness. The whispers intensified, a haunting cacophony that slammed into my thoughts with the force of a tidal wave. "You cannot hide, Lila. You are one of us now." That I froze, the gravity of their words crashing upon me with the weight of an entire existence. Around me, the walls wept, and I could feel the chill of their dread resonating deep into my bones. There was no sanctuary here. That I in the center of the chapel, an altar emerged from the shadows, flanked by dismal shapes that shifted across the stone. Atop the altar lay a small mirror, shattered yet reflective, the shards glinting like accused eyes. I felt a pull from it, an insatiable curiosity urging me to look closer, to uncover its secrets. Some primal instinct gnawed at me, another. Truth was hidden within those fractured reflections, but the ground beneath me quaked once more, and I realized the faces in the shadows were not just whispers, they were echoes of those who had once been anchored to this altar. They had left pieces of their souls embedded within the stone, offering their essence in exchange for liberation. A perpetual cycle of sacrifice. All around me, twisted forms reached out, longing for a connection that would ensure their permanence. "Join us, Lila. Become a thread in our dark tapestry," they pleaded, voices mingling with yearning and desperation. Terror gnawed at the edges of my resolve, and I turned away, ready to flee back into the darkness. But with every step I took, more shadows cascaded towards the mirror, pouring from the corners of the chapel like melted wax. The laughter returned, a roiling tempest of mockery and delight, spiraling upward into an alarming pitch, and just before I could escape, the mirror shattered with a deafening sound, the pieces swirling into the air, morphing into 1,000 tiny specters that lunged toward me, eyes glimmering with an insatiable hunger. In that moment, I realized there was no escape. The darkness was not only here, it was already inside me. Their whisper became a deafening roar as I was consumed, the identities of the lost merging with my own, leaving me with one unspeakable truth: in this dance of the damned, I was no longer just Lila. As the shadows encircled me entirely, a realization gripped my heart: the nightmare had only just begun, and the entities I had tried to escape were only the first layer of a far more sinister truth. And then I felt a presence surfacing, both horrific and exquisite, awaiting my full surrender. I found myself standing in an endless expanse, a landscape of shadows swirling around me as the weight of the world pressed against my chest. Each thud of my heart echoed through the void, reminding me of the time I had left myself behind. Memories danced just out of reach, ephemeral wraiths floating among the darkness, teasing me with glimpses of my life. I was separated from who I was, and yet, here I was, aware, terrified, and losing grip on reality. From the depths of that never-ending night, a soft murmur grew, the resonant hum of my family's lost voices drifting through the space like a sinister lullaby. "You are home, Lila," they sang, a twisted chorus of longing and despair. As I turned to face where the voices emanated, the shadows coiled, morphing into familiar shapes, but their appearances unnerved me. Distorted versions of my family stood before me, their faces painted with darkness, smiling yet sorrowful. "Join us," my brother beckoned, reaching out with gnarled fingers that shivered in the dark air. "We've missed you." With each heartbeat, the hollowness of their gazes burrowed deeper into my core, making me question if I had ever known them at all. My hesitation lingered, feeding their energy. We stood there in the murky twilight, me family and I, caught between worlds, tethered by the shadows that bound us together. "What have you become?" I whispered, my voice barely recognizable amidst the creeping terror that enveloped me. I drew closer, trying to glean some reasoning from their inky shadows, but the familiarity twisted into something grotesque. There was a hunger in their eyes, an insatiable greed for the light I still foolishly believed I could possess. That we are the darkness you fear, they sang, voices interwoven with a haunting melody. You opened this door, Lila. This is where you belong. As their proximity crushed around me, the shadows reached for me, beckoning with foul intent. Then, the surreal truth crashed down upon me. His darkness was not only a prison for them, but it was my inheritance. Sudden recognition stabbed through the veil of confusion. The stories we once shared became a tapestry of secrets that connected me to this realm, dark patterns weaving deeper into my bloodline. Like a dam breaking, the truth cascaded through my thoughts. My family wasn't merely trapped, they had willingly sacrificed their essence to bind me to this place, each one holding a thread of my being, binding me to their tragedy. No. I screamed, breaking the spell that tightened around me. I won't join you. The shadows surged, angered by my defiance as they twisted menacingly. My brother's features morphed into agony, the sharp edges of regret and despair splitting his visage as the shadows writhed behind him. Your strength fuels our existence, Lila. He shouted, voice echoing distressingly. You can't deny what runs through your veins. And just like that, my knees buckled beneath me, realization washing over me like cold water. I was the latest key to their freedom, the missing puzzle piece they needed to enter the void completely. No. I gasped, scrambling back. Desperation pulsed in my veins as I fought against their allure, but I was ensnared in a web of memories that were not mine. I clawed at the air, choking back emotions that threatened to tear me apart. They deserved something better, not my surrender to the darkness. I had to be the light that didn't fade, but the shadows crept closer, filling my senses with a suffocating weight that made each breath feel more labored than the last. The whispers grew louder, drowning out my pleas, merging desire with grief. I could see them reaching out, yearning to pull me in. Embrace your fate. Give in. They chanted, their spectral hands stretching toward me, curling just shy of contact. The cacophony of their screams fused with the silence, becoming a singular voice that resonated through my very being, cleaving me down the center. I was losing myself to the darkness, a brutal embrace pulling me into the depths. As their laughter crescendoed, I knew, the whispers would ultimately unveil the truth. The darkness wasn't just a place I wanted to escape. It sat within my very soul, waiting patiently until the time was right to rise and claim dominion over my heart. In a moment of desperate clarity, I made a choice, a painful but necessary choice. I would not become like them, I would not surrender my essence. I choose the light, I choked, as I felt the shadows lash out in furious anger. The intensity around me erupted, a chaotic storm tearing apart the darkness, making it scream with rage. My family's contorted faces warped, straying further into darkness even as my back turned toward them. The weight of their intrusion burned through my heart, and I sprinted toward the glimmer, even as shadows clawed at my heels, urging me to return. I ran towards the light, the pain of their abandonment and agonizing gnawing in my chest, but I was willing to carry that burden. Suddenly, the light exploded outward, the shadows recoiling in terror as I burst through the threshold, leaving behind the grasp of an eternity of sorrow. My courage radiated brightly as the darkness splintered and fractured, howling in defeat. I landed back in the real world, sprawling on the floor of my basement, gasping, trembling, but in the stillness of that liberating moment, my eyes caught the TV screen, the last remnants of the images fading away, revealing an empty room filled with the faintest echoes of laughter. I blinked, feeling a prickle of dread course through me once more. The buffering color shifted back, frozen frames of my family, faces twisted in anguish. I stood up slowly, trembling, realizing that as I returned to the world of light, I was still bound to the darkness. Quiet whispers lingered in my ears, reminding me that their hunger was insatiable, waiting just beyond my reach. As I took a step backward, the basement filled with the insidious silence, and then came the whisper, chilling and intimate, "You sealed the door, but you will always be one of us. The shadows will follow, waiting." Glancing back at the flickering television, the figures emerged once more within the glow, undaunted by my flight, and with each pulse of darkness, the truth settled in a pit within me. Escape was just an illusion. I was never meant to leave, I had merely traded one darkness for another. The shadows were now part of mean inheritance I couldn't outrun, a dark legacy that slumbered just below the surface, waiting for the moment I would falter. And in the encroaching silence, a shiver crawled down my spine as I realized the final truth: no matter where I went, the shadows would always close in, a family of despair watching, waiting with their insatiable hunger. "Welcome home, Lila," the voices whispered in unison, a haunting lullaby in the gathering dusk. "You've opened the door, and now we shall never part."